Welcome to this meeting of Disabled People for a Labour Victory. It's a historic meeting, I think. I don't think there's been a meeting called like this, certainly in the last 50 years. There might have been some time before, but I doubt it. And really, the reason why I decided to call this meeting is I think Labour have amazing policies on disability. There are 10 million disabled voters. There are 5 million non-disabled personal assistants or carers. That's 15 million people, which is enough to swing any election if the party had actually really pushed its policies out to where it mattered. Instead, they have got stuck into a few issues and are missing our issues. So this was an attempt to focus on our issues tonight. So welcome allies who are not disabled people, but I know that the vast majority of the audience here tonight are disabled people. And we come together in solidarity to really, even though there's only 3 days to go, a lot can still be done. The film of this meeting will go up on the web tomorrow. So that can be something that people can then transmit on to other people. A lot can happen still in 3 days. And so I don't think it's over at all. Everything's to be fought for yet. And I'd like to introduce our first speaker. And I just hope that the people who promised me this morning they would be here at their time schedules will be here. But anyway, at 7:15 we hope John will be here, but if he's later we will take other speakers. But Francesca is here, as promised. Francesca Martinez needs really no introduction, but I've known her for a long time. And she's a great champion of disabled people's rights and, in her own right, a great performer and comedian. Francesca.
Thank you. First of all, well done, Richard, for putting on this great event. It's a real honour to be here. I totally agree with you that events such as these are so important. I don't know about you, but I'm just so nervous. I barely slept in 6 weeks. I don't know about you guys, but it just feels to me so much is riding on this election. And it's really interesting when you meet people and they don't feel that way. It's kind of like, oh yeah, there's an election on, isn't there? Yeah, I'm not quite sure who I'm going to vote for. The party who's going to, shit on me repeatedly, or the party who's going to try and make my life better. It's a hard choice. I can only imagine that if you're in that position, you're in a position of privilege, because for many people around this country, disabled and non-disabled, this election really presents a choice between life and death. And it still astounds me that reality is so little known. We live in a country where the media has largely ignored this issue. We've had newsnight specials and column inches on various other issues the last few years, but this issue remains really invisible, I feel. And I feel that there's a huge human rights abuse going on right now. And I went on Question Time in June. They rang me up and I really didn't want to do it, because who would? But I felt very compelled to go on and try and say a few words about what was happening in this country today, one of the richest countries in the world, and tens of thousands of disabled people and sick people are dying because of cuts. And yet our media is totally silent on this issue. And so I felt very grateful that I could say a few words about this. The response was overwhelming. The clip went viral. I think it had like 11 million views in a week. And I had messages from all around the country saying stuff like, Francesca, I'm just so grateful someone's told my story. and it was absolutely heartbreaking that people were just grateful that someone was acknowledging this. And in a way, I felt very sad that the segment of me talking about this was such a big deal, because it really illustrated the fact that this hasn't been said on television. And I think many people were really shocked. I had a lot of people saying, "Oh, we had no idea this was happening." So I think one of the kind of primary things we have to do is to start letting people know what is happening in their country, in a supposedly civilized country. Just a quick personal story. I'm going through my PIP assessment right now, which is it's a brilliant experience, guys. It's making me feel so good about myself. It was very interesting actually getting that letter, and the whole kind of wording of that letter was so designed to be so intimidating. It was like, "Hey Francesca, we're changing your benefit." It was like, "Your DLA is ending, your life is over." So from the word go, it was a very kind of scary experience. Now I'm sure most of you in here have been through this or are going through it. And it was a real kind of, I guess, insight into the psychology behind benefit and the benefit reform and kind of the new culture of blame that we're living in. So I felt very uneasy. When I was 6, I was tested for disability living allowance, and I was awarded a lifelong benefit because I'm wobbly for life. That's kind of the way it goes, and that makes sense. And I think it's a question of science, not opinion, whether I have a disability and certain needs. So going through this process has been incredibly, I guess, humiliating, frustrating, because I've been disabled all my life. I can honestly say that I really struggled with the notion of needing help. Like, contrary to the media narrative, disabled people don't love getting help. We don't sit at home going, "Oh, aren't we lucky to scrounge off the state? It's brilliant." I think the opposite is true. I think we really struggle with the idea of needing help, of asking for support. So this current culture, I think, really is humiliating because it makes people feel guilty for needing support. And during my PIP assessment, when I had to list all the things I couldn't do, it just reminded me of all the battles that my teenage self had fought to be proud of myself, to love myself, to feel worthy despite needing help. And I won those battles, but they took a lot of work and a lot of effort. And I kind of feel like now we're living in a society which is not only attacking our basic human rights, they're also attacking and eroding our psychological well-being, because they're making us feel that we don't deserve or merit help. And I feel very strongly that this is wrong. I feel that anyone can become disabled at any time. I think 80% of disabilities are acquired throughout their life. And rather than taking a kind of humane approach and just saying, we're going to be a society that really make sure that we allow and help everyone to lead independent and dignified lives. We're doing the opposite. We're going backwards. And the interesting thing is when you look into the benefit reforms, we're told they're about saving money, but they're actually costing money. And without going into a lot of boring figures, they're costing money because of various reasons. One, they're taking away the support many of us need to work and to be independent. So they're actually making us less independent and more dependent on state help. And a quick figure for you, the fraud of DLA was about 0.5%, and that added up to 60 million a year. Sounds quite a lot, but the new PIT reform was estimated at 700 million a year, and that's not including the billions paid out to private companies to carry out assessments that were previously done by doctors on the NHS. So a bit of digging reveals that actually this isn't about saving money. This is costing the taxpayer billions of pounds, not to mention all the appeals that are being won. I think it's 3/4 of appeals are now won, costing the state a huge amount of money. So you've got to begin to ask yourself, well, if these cuts and reforms are not about saving money, what are they about? And I think they're about creating a culture where there is no compassion, there is no support network, there is no social responsibility, and there is no expectation of help. Because, quite frankly, if the government doesn't help sick or disabled people, they don't have to help anybody. And I think their aim is to turn us into a society like America, where American citizens don't have any expectation of any help. It's a dog-eat-dog culture out there. And one of the biggest causes of bankruptcy is having a disabled child, which I think is absolutely shocking. And instead of being proud of being one of the world leaders in disability rights, we are following America's route. We are eroding all our hard-won rights that people like Richard fought so hard to achieve. Instead of being proud of that and really kind of nurturing that and protecting that, we're throwing that away and we're going backwards. So I can honestly say support in many ways was better when I was a kid than now. That is not the way things should be. You know, we are a rich country, but our priorities have become so twisted that, you know, you get a Labour Party led by Jeremy Corbyn, and he's regarded as an extremist and a commie and a Marxist. No, it's just that we've gone so far down the free market economic inhumane route that anything challenging that is really presented as extremist. So I feel we've got a huge battle in our hands. We are fighting it. Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell have been hugely supportive over decades. They have turned up when we've held tiny demos, when we did the Wild petition. John was the first MP to come and champion the petition. And I remember him ringing me up one evening and saying, you know, I will not rest until this changes. These are two people who are deeply, deeply committed to the cause of equality. So I feel we are incredibly lucky to have them fighting our corner. And the Labour manifesto is brilliant. You know, they pledged to scrap universal credit, to scrap work capability assessment, and to really try and create a humane and fair welfare system that is based on science and not cruelty. So I really feel we have a huge opportunity to change the direction of this country. And I know we have this word politics, which is associated with, you know, Parliament and people talking in posh accents, kind of ruling us. But I think politics is just really about how we treat each other. And right now, if you look at the values under attack, you know, the values of caring for each other, of looking after each other, those are being demonised. But I want a government who is proud to fund welfare, proud to fund an NHS, proud to fund free education, because frankly, what better way of spending our money is there than those things? So I just want to say, obviously, I'm sure everyone in here is going to vote Labour on Thursday, and if you're not, you're in the wrong room. Please keep talking to people. A lot of people just don't know how much we are desperately in need of a change of government. You know, we can't lose more people to the cuts. It's a disgrace. I can't even think too much about what's happened over the last 10 years because it's too angry. It makes me too angry and too upset. All I can say is we've got to change course. We've got to embrace our humanity. We've got to fight for the values that make us human and that make life beautiful for everyone. So please vote Labour.
Okay, thank you very much, Francesca. It's a really good start to get us off to. I don't know where John is, and I know he will get here if he possibly can. So, and Marsha, you have to go by 8, I think. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll have a couple of other speakers and then take you. If John comes, we'll slot him in and then take you, okay?
I'm happy to be sidelined for
Okay.
John.
Well, we will hear from Marsha as well, because we think I think it's useful. So, other than John, the next person on the agenda I was going to say a little bit about what's been happening across education under these 10 years of the Tories and the coalition, because I think people they know what the cuts are, but they don't know what the damaging effect on special educational needs and disabled people's education has been. And it has actually been totally disastrous. Even the government, the Commons Select Committee has said that the reforms that were put through in 2014 were a complete disaster. And the ministers had nothing to say when they went up to argue about this. Well, I visited one school. Yeah, but you're in charge of 23,000 schools. One school won't do it. You know, the problem fundamentally is that the reforms that Michael Gove put in the middle of middle of this decade to streamline the curriculum, to raise the level up to the e-baccalaureate, to pull up the drawbridge on the kids who were slow learners so they couldn't actually get their steps on the first couple of rungs of the curriculum. That no coursework was allowed because the tabloid press had a campaign that this was all being written by parents, which was absolute nonsense. And 2 years before it was banned, it had all been brought into the school, so the kids had to do the coursework in the school. So that was a lie. But it suited the Tories' purpose, because they knew that only certain children would do well on that sort of coursework. And the broad mass of children would not do well, who aren't necessarily academic, but had, and my background as a teacher, had for many years been able to achieve reasonable levels so they could go on to further and even higher education. That has actually been stopped. And the gap between the disabled students and the non-disabled students has actually grown under this government in terms of academic achievement, which is a very narrow measure of what we should be doing. That isn't what our schools should be doing. And at the same time, the creative arts, drama, art, dance have all been cut, and in many, many secondary schools are now no longer on the curriculum at all. And yet, what are we known as these days? We're not known as the leaders of the British Empire. We're not known as a great manufacturing centre, because most of the wealth is made 2 miles away from here in the city, and it's not taxed, by the way. It's allowed to go on, and one of the things Labour will do is to tax that money, because more money passes hands in the city every day than in most countries' GDP for the whole year. And that is what has to be tackled, because that is runaway capitalism, which is actually driving this country over the cliff edge. And so that sort of tax will go for funding all students to have a maintenance grant right through till when they finish their post-16. And if they go on to higher education, then they should get that. In my view, there should be an alternative route for technical and vocational education up to a higher level, so people can get a reasonably paying job and be trained, and there's no reason why disabled young people shouldn't go on those apprenticeships with reasonable adjustments. And so the whole system, the whole edifice, is based on either, whichever way you want to look at it, the 1950s grammar school view of the curriculum. And remember, in the grammar schools in the 50s, only 20% of children did anything on those, and the other 80% left school at their 14th to 15th birthday and were put on the scrap heap. That's the model that we were going back to with Mr. Gove. Or we're going back to an even further model, which is the public school model, an elite model which only meets 7% of the population, and more is based on a meritocracy of thinking. Labour's policy is not meritocracy in education, it is social justice for all. And that is a big, big change. And what it means is that inclusivity will have to be at the centre of a Labour education policy. Labour is committed in the manifesto to both implement the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which if you look at it now, with Article 24 and General Comment number 4, there is no alternative but developing inclusive education and slowly getting rid of the segregation that exists. Instead, what we've seen under the Tories is a runaway increase in special schools, free special schools, and grants to independent special schools to grow. And the net result has been, where we thought under Labour in the last decade we were beginning to bring down segregation, we had reached more than 60% of children with a state or now an EHC plan in mainstream schools. That has now come down to 49%. So that is the result of the government policies. It is creating more segregation. If you have segregation, you are not able to deal with your peers and the general hubbub of life because you have been secluded and isolated somewhere else from everybody else.
Shame.
And that is a denial of our human rights, because inclusion is a human right. Now, certainly, the school system is not ready for this, and it will take a number of years to get it there. But the first thing we should do is start building the capacity in our mainstream schools, where still the vast majority of disabled kids are, so that they can actually stay there and thrive. And that will mean changing the curriculum, but also training support staff and teachers to give young people what they need, developing person-centred approaches where the young person's views are taken seriously rather than just being despised, and stopping the obsession with the league table culture which Labour is committed to do. We're also committed in Labour to get rid of Ofsted and replace it with a more caring, supportive inspectorate, not using it as the currency of closing schools, which is what has been happening under this government. And who have been taking over their schools? Surprise, surprise, they're rich friends who have set up all sorts of shell companies to take these over. Some of them work, some of them have gone bust, quite a lot have gone bust, and then they don't know what to do. It's exactly the same as in the public procurement building industry, where instead of it being built by people trained and properly regulated under health and safety, it's gone out to companies like Carillion to build hospitals and schools and other things which we know they have cut corners on and are producing unsafe buildings and often not producing the buildings at all. So Labour's policy on industry and employment is also linked to its policy on education. And of course the Green New Deal has to be a part of that in our education. We need every child growing up to understand the threat that we now, the existential threat that we now face in this world, and we have to do something about it. Labour is the only party committed by 2030 to actually bring down the greenhouse gases to the permitted level. The Tories are prepared to wait to 2050, which will be too late.
Yeah.
And we must, the way that many of us will be dead by then, we must educate the next generation to make sure that that actually happens, so there is some survival for the human race. And it isn't going to happen with Donald Trump and his friends and their form of capitalism, which is about destroying the world. At last, with the Labour Party today, we have a chance of actually seeing sense and building a society that is just for all, particularly our children, our disabled children. Thank you. We're looking at John. Is John anywhere? Right. Right. So the next speaker, I'm going to take Kirsten and then I will take you, Marshall. Is that all right? Kirsten is a cabinet member in Haringey Council. She's a Labour Party councillor, and I've known Kirsten for a long time when we used to jointly share something called Equality 2025, I think it was called. Yeah. Which was the date that all equality was meant to have happened under the last Labour government. But of course it's gone much further backwards now, and we'll be very lucky if we ever reach that sort of date. But anyway, Kirsten, we would welcome your comment. It's just in front of you.
There's on a stand here.
That's great.
Yeah.
The blind open, the blind.
Is it on?
No.
Is that one not on? It may need pressing on.
This
Could someone help who can see the button?
Yeah, well, that's not me then, is
There's
it?
the two people up there.
I better sit down.
hair.
Quite literally the
That
blind leading the
works.
blind.
Is there a roving mic?
I think
No,
it's
it's
working.
on
It's
now.
working now. I can hear. Is that
Perfect.
working?
Yeah.
It should work.
Okay, Kirsten. Off you go.
All right then.
Yes, perfect.
Here we go. Up your nose. There we go. To meet you tonight. So I'm Kirsten Hearn. I'm a cabinet member for climate change and sustainability. They let me out of my disabled box in Haringey Council. And I'm so out of my disabled box that even middle class members of the sub-community regularly, really badly abuse me. I'm so shocked by it actually, because I'm used to hate crime type things, but I'm not used to kind of like polite society being so very, very rude to me and forgetting that I'm a poor little prick. Sad thing that I am. Anyway, that doesn't work at all. They just had closed the road. They got really hysterical. What is the matter with them? Anyway, that's one side. But it's very, very interesting being a councillor in this day and age. So, I'm with Francesca on the anxiety bit. I'm really, really a bit tortured by what's happening because it feels to me like our dreams could come true, or it could be our worst nightmare. And the awful thing is that our worst nightmare is going to be terrible. And I don't know how many people who are already struggling are going to still be alive by the end of another 5 years of Tories or even the bloody Liberal Democrats and Tories. I've been on the doorstep a lot. Lots of people are really excited and quite, oh yeah, bring it on. And I'm thinking, well, partly that, but I'm also thinking, oh, what if we lose? And it's really important to acknowledge that, because I think we can go around being butch, but actually our lives are on the line. Our lives are on the line. If we go on like this much more, heaven knows what will happen to us. It's bad enough as it is. And I know probably all of us know people who have died as a result of our cruel benefit system, as a result of not getting the right support, as a result of being so thoroughly depressed by austerity, they've even taken their own lives. We know that. We can't go on, so we've got to find a way. Oops, there we go.
Has it gone up?
I didn't touch
Do you want to hold the mic?
Yeah,
Take her
hold the mic.
that one and bring in the other one.
I'll do three-hand job.
Hold that one.
Oh, that-
All right then.
oh,
What?
let me-
No
sorry,
teeth either.
sorry.
Yeah, right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So, okay. Okay, so the struggle over the last 9 years has been really difficult. Access to work has shrunk, and as somebody who is a self-employed person in another incarnation, it's been such a battle just to keep the funding in. And if I don't get the funding, I can't do the work. And that is the case with so many people who may be not as argumentative as me with access to work about getting my needs met, because I'm quite vociferous, really. But I mean, other people get much more intimidated, and I just think this is awful. If we don't have the means to go out and do a job, if we want to, we need to do a job, then what the hell can we do if we're not given the support?
Yeah.
They make us leap through ever more difficult hoops. It becomes more and more entangled, and we have to become more and more dexterous in the way in which we argue against bureaucracy. These are emotions that disabled people feel every day as we fight to retain the DLA and PIP and independent living and care packages, how we, as we struggle to pay the rent or to keep a job or to decide whether to eat or heat. It was tough in 2010, but now local government cuts affect disabled people disproportionately. And I know all about this as a councillor who's trying to make a balanced budget and having difficulty. Local government has been hacked to pieces since 2010. We have lost, most of us, more than 50% of our budgets. We struggle to make that balanced budget since we've already cut discretionary services to the bone. And now we're picking apart the services that we really can't afford to cut because they are so vital for people's lives. And, well, not in Haringey, but we're nearly forced to make terrible decisions, and it's a real battle to try and hang on to what we've got, and it's very, very difficult. Interesting enough, discretionary funds pay for things like the pavements. Now, I've noticed with interest that the Tories have committed to mending all the potholes. And that's good, because they mend the pavements too. But the thing is, actually, if we can't get out of our homes because there's really great holes in the road and on the street to get to the lovely, not very accessible bus stop to get onto the hopefully accessible bus or whatever, then we're imprisoned in our homes. We're reliant on the car, we're reliant on other people to support us to get out. And for many people, that is the case. That, you know, it's the environment's so difficult, it's very hard to get out and do anything. And what does that mean for dignity and independence if we're so forced to be dependent on other people? But no one's left to advocate for disabled people. All the disabled people's organisations have been cut. Because that's the first thing they came for. 2011, certainly know that in Haringey actually, it was the previous administration axed by half, if not more, most people's budgets, and it just got worse and worse from there, and forced the rest to contract for services they previously would have as a matter of rights for people. So we lost all the advocacy, we lost all that campaigning, we lost all that voice of other people in that way. So now we have nobody to kind of like speak up for disabled people, to work with councils and other organisations to make them do the right thing. And it's a bit of a tragedy. The only voices left are non-disabled voices. They may have good intentions, but they don't speak for us because they're not us. We need a Labour government to invest in local government so we can get services back to people so that we can live independent lives. Providing independent living and social care for disabled people, including those of working age. A fair and humane access to work so that we can get a job and keep it. Investment in accessible transport so we can get around. Investment in the NHS, free at the point of delivery. To everyone who needs it so we don't have to queue. Many of us have a long and intimate relationship with health services, don't we? I certainly have. I've got a part-time job called going to health appointments. I'm a bit old and I've got a few extra things going on now, and it takes a bit of my time, but actually it's taking much longer. I remember when I first started getting all these horrible things, about 15 years ago, I could get to be seen by a consultant in 4 weeks' time. 4 weeks, but I've been waiting 18 months for one of them. But, you know, I don't think I'm not dead yet, but I might be if it goes on much longer. We need to make sure that we're going to build homes in the Labour Party stage. It's important. Accessible social homes are important. Many of us don't earn enough to get a mortgage. Many of us find it really hard, and we can't afford the private rent. It's so expensive. It's also a very volatile market where you end up getting kicked out after 5 minutes. So it's really important. Social homes will make a huge difference to people, and we ensure that those who are currently living or for temporary accommodation or inaccessible accommodation can get somewhere where they can live independently. And in the end of the day, if you provide a social home, actually we save loads of money on lots of other things. But no one can do that kind of maths, unfortunately. Certainly not the Tories. Those are just a few things mentioned. The fantastic manifesto, and I read it and wept. I wept at 2017 one because that was fantastic. But this is even better.
Yeah.
What a difference it will make to us. What a difference it will make to disabled people. We will be able to feel like, yeah, we're here, we belong, and we are part of society. Because at the moment, I think for lots of us, we feel a bit other, alien, elsewhere, shut out, excluded. Well, enough of all that. And the challenge I'm going to ask you lot to think about, I mean, obviously you're all, hopefully, Labour voters, but I want to ask each one of you, in the next 2 days, can you talk to 5 disabled people who you don't know if they would vote Labour and try and persuade them to vote Labour and get out and go and do it on the day? And then I'd like to offer another challenge to any of you who feel up to it, to volunteer to go and do some last minute door knocking. And you can take somebody who can hop them down steps for you if you can't do it yourself. But door knocking is fantastic. I have been doing it for ages, and I just want to share one story before I stop. I went to Stevenage the other week, it's a marshal, it's a keen marshal, and they sent me to Bungalow City. And I was with my support worker. Bungalow City is full of older and disabled people. I'm really glad because I know flaming steps to climb up. Because in Haringey, when you go canvas, you have to climb loads of steps and there's no lifts. Anyway, so I went to Bungalow City and I knocked on the door. This woman came to the door and she said something I couldn't understand. And my support worker said to me, she's deaf. And I said, and I remembered that you're a sign language interpreter. Could you communicate? And she said, oh yeah, all right then. I got her fingers out and started communicating. Proper sign language interpreter with me in another incarnation. And we had this fantastic conversation with this woman who said at the beginning, I'm not going to vote. It's not good. Nobody bothers me. Nobody cares about deaf people. We don't really think. And anyway, and then some very dodgy things after that. Anyway, we had quite a long, I'm not going to mention what they were, but you can imagine. We had quite a long conversation, about half an hour, which is very long for a doorstep. And at the end of that, she said, I'm really pleased because you're a blind person standing in front of me, and I thought that, you know, people who are political, not disabled people, not deaf people, not people like me and you. And I'm really pleased too, she also said, because you brought someone who could help you talk to me. And that's never happened to me before. And she said, and I'm going to vote Labour. Yeah. Other people as well, but I might tell you about that later. They're all disabled people, and I persuade them all to vote Labour because they saw me on the doorstep. And I think that's important. Those of us who are disabled people, been out on the doorstep, we will know that's the kind of experience we get, you know, the treatment we get is quite interesting. But I have been doing it for a long time because I'm a politician now for 6 years. And when I first started, I've been patted on the head by a Tory, and I've been sworn at by a UKIPper. I swore back. Anyway, up to revolution. Get out and tell everybody vote Labour Thursday.
There, okay. I'll just introduce you much. I'm afraid John obviously has 101 demands on his life. This morning he said he would definitely be here, but I can see what's happening, so, you know, I'm sure he's carrying on the good fight. And so, thank you.
No, that's all right. Cheeks microphone.
Yeah, I need one.
Mind if we take
No, leave her. Take the other. It's on? All right. That's all right. So thank you very much, Kirsten. That was brilliant. And remember now, you've all got to go out and find at least 5 disabled people to talk to. Get to vote. To talk to before polling day. And, you know, that's what we need to do. And whatever happens in this election, I think us coming together here, I've got everybody's emails, we need to form a London network that can actually go on in whichever elections come up, that we can actually fight for our interests, because those interests, whatever the reason, are not really taken as a top priority within the party. And I think Marcia de Cordova will tell us about that. She's the battery's going, I think.
Oh, Richard, use
So, Marcia really came from nowhere and winning Battersea last year in 2017.
Woo!
From the Tories. She's fighting now to get an increased majority, which we very much hope you will on Thursday, because we want you to be our Minister for Disabled People in the new Labour government. Marcia de Cordova.
Oh, hello. Oh gosh, can you not hear me now?
Yeah.
I know. Oh, friends, comrades, it is really good to be here with you this evening. Can I just say, obviously, as you all know, I was elected in 2017, overturning a Tory majority of 8,000 and winning that seat. And now I am standing for re-election, and I have been campaigning day and night in Battersea. And let me tell you, this is the only event I have left my constituency to come to. The only that I've left my. So thank you for inviting me. It feels great to be here, and it's great to see so many people here. My next line says to thank John, but I am going to still thank John. I am going to still thank John, because it is the likes of John McDonnell and Jeremy Corbyn that have been keeping up that good fight in Parliament when nobody would listen to us, where we had people voting for social security cuts, but people like John, Jeremy and Diane were voting no, not abstaining, voting no to those cuts. So I want to still just show my thanks and gratitude to everything John and Jeremy have done. Francesca, it's great to be sharing a platform with you, because you are an inspiring campaigner and a great person. And obviously my dear friend Kirsten here, who we used to be councillors together for a few years, and she's also incredible. And not forgetting you, Richard, for just always pulling. I mean, to pull off tonight is pretty incredible. Pretty incredible. But friends, can I call you friends? Yes. Friends. Comrades. We've got 3 days. We could be potentially, 2 now, okay, still Monday. I lose the days of the week, but anyway. But you know, we've only got a few days left before we can elect a Labour government that will bring about real change, to rebuild our country, not just for the few, but for the many. A Labour government that will transform this country to create a fair and more equal society. And actually, there is no greater contrast than the last decade that we have seen, where there has just been this systematic erosion of the rights of disabled people, our right to access public services, education, employment, transport, justice, housing and independent living. And I know the list goes on. We have fallen victim to that right-wing narrative that sees us as burdens to society rather than the citizens that we are, with value and with potential and with respect. And this is how this Tory government has created a hostile environment for disabled people. The hostile environment that is responsible for grave and systematic violations of our human rights. And that's not me saying that. Remember, that was the UN Committee on the Rights of Disabled People back in 2016. The UK was the first state to ever have been investigated, which I believe, and I know everyone here believes, is a shocking indictment of their austerity programme. And this was repeated again when the UN Special Envoy into Extreme Poverty likened the Department for Work and Pensions to a 19th century workhouse. Friends, this is what we are living in it's the 5th richest economy, and this is how they are choosing to treat people. It is shameful. The evidence, shows that this government's austerity program is responsible for over 100,000 people's lives lost. That is shameful. And we know that there are, 14 million people living in poverty, and many of those include a family where there is a disabled person. And then there's the scandalous rise of food bank use under the Liberal Democrats, because, friends, we must not forget the role the Lib Dems played when they were in coalition with the Conservatives. That has disproportionately affected disabled people. And we know that according to the Trussell Trust, 3/4 of food bank parcels will go into households where there was a disabled person. But, friends, change is coming, and it can come. Because a Labour government on the 12th of December, under the leadership of Jeremy and John, is the only chance that we have to ending that hostile environment. Our manifesto for disabled people, Breaking Down Barriers, is our chance to build a society according to the social model of disability. Labour in government will work to remove those barriers facing disabled people, whether it's accessing social security, education, transport, employment, housing and independent living. We will honour our commitment to the UN Convention on the Rights of Disabled People and incorporate that into law. And I know that is going to be a huge challenge, but we are committed to doing that, working with disabled people to ensure that we achieve this. And we will bring about real change, and that starts by ending that hostile environment at the Department for Work and Pensions. As our manifesto sets out how we will rebuild social security that is fair, compassionate and there for all of us in our time of need. And that is why we will create a Department for Social Security, because that's what it is, social security. A social security system that we are as proud of as our National Health Service, that we will be as proud of when we introduce our National Education Service. We will scrap that cruel and callous universal credit system, which this government continues to defend despite the devastation that it has caused. We knew that this year, just 6 months ago, the DWP spent £250,000, £250,000 on advertisements for universal credit in the Metro, which was banned this year by the Advertising Standards Agency for misleading the public. This is what we are up against, this hostile government. That is why there is no way we can wake up on Friday. I mean, I'll probably still be up, but there's no way on Friday morning we can see Boris Johnson returning back to number 10. It cannot happen. It cannot happen. We will replace our social security system, co-producing and working with disabled people. That is what we are committed to. That is what I am committed to doing. As soon as we do enter government, though, we appreciate that these things can't happen overnight. So we're going to introduce them emergency reforms to mitigate some of the worst features of universal credit, immediately introducing that self-care element that will replace the severe disability premium that was scrapped when universal credit was first introduced. We will scrap the cruel and callous assessment frameworks for personal independence payment and ESA. Immediately ensure that those assessments will be brought back in-house, but ultimately working and co-producing with disabled people a humane system to ensure that we receive the support that we are entitled to. There is no stronger indictment of the failing assessment frameworks than over 5,000 people dying just months after being found fit for work following their work capability assessment. And that is why I was proud that Labour supported the Justice for Jolie Whiting petition, calling for that independent inquiry into these deaths. That petition was signed by over 50,000 people, including the likes of myself and John McDonnell. But in government, we will make sure that that inquiry happens. Because it needs to happen. Because justice needs to be done. We intend to reverse those cruel cuts to the ESA work-related activity group and reinstate that £30 a week amount that was taken away from those in receipt of ESA, but also ensuring that it is there as part of the emergency package within universal credit. But something that I am so pleased we are going to be doing, and that is ending the entire sanctions regime for disabled people. And ensure that legal aid will be available to those appealing their social security decisions. Because again, it is within that justice system that disabled people have had to rely on for too many times. You know, you've got to go to appeal before your decision's overturned, before you get the social security that you are rightfully entitled to. But incorporating the UN CRPD into law means moving beyond reforming the social security system. We all know this. It is about building and creating a more fair, equal and just system, ensuring that disabled people have access to the labour market equally, an inclusive education system, transport, housing and living independently. We will radically transform our transport system by ending the driver-only operation on the railways, bringing back guards on our trains so that we can turn up and go and travel independently and not have to book in advance. Who else has to do that? Why should we? I'm proud that we're going to do this. And we have to expand, we will be expanding our bus services to include audio-visual on our buses. That already is happening in London, but it needs to happen across the country. So again, I am proud that our transport team are going to be doing this. We will halve the stagnant disability employment gap by introducing packages that look at the reasonable adjustment passport scheme that actually goes with you. Because at the moment, each time we change jobs or whatever, we have to go through the whole process again. Having that passport means it is already there in black and white, and that is what we need. And therefore, whatever job we go into, that support is there for us. We will require all employers with over 250 employees to report on the number of disabled people they employ and report on the disability pay gap. We will update the Equality Act to ensure that it includes disability leave, so that our leave is reported separately to any other sick leave, because at the moment that is unequal. And we will make sure that our justice system is open to all by restoring legal aid advice, recruiting many new community lawyers and building more law centres. Richard has already talked extensively about inclusive education, and I'm proud that by incorporating the UNCRPD, we have to move towards an inclusive education system. I benefited from having special education needs support at school because of my own disability, and it is wrong that so many of our young people are being off-rolled or pushed into these pupil referral units or just not getting any support. It is a scandal.
It's a disgrace.
It is a scandal, and it is a scandal that we are moving backwards towards segregated education, where we progress forward. And we will incorporate disability hate crime into law, so that disabled people no longer feel that, you know what, they fear leaving their homes because of discrimination at work, but also on our streets or in political office. It is wrong. And above all, a Labour government will ensure that it will be nothing about us is going to be done without us. Embodying that principle, empowering disabled people and enhancing our voices. In a Labour government, every policy decision, every pledge, we will be co-producing with and for disabled people. We've come a long way, friends. And that is true through the leadership that we have had with Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell at the top of our party. And this is how we will build that transformative movement, capable of reshaping the lives of disabled people, capable of demolishing that hostile environment framework that has marginalised so many of us. I am so proud, so very proud to fight alongside so many of you here in this room to actually create a more fair and equal society. But I say it again, we are just a few days away. Kirsten has set the challenge of each of you speaking to 5 disabled people and ensuring that they vote, but more importantly, ensuring that they vote for Labour. It is only with a Labour government can these changes come about. We can fight and we can do it. Believe me, friends, ignore the mainstream media, okay? Because it's not what they're showing you on the media or what the right-wing press are writing about. It is what we're doing. Every conversation we have, every phone call we have, every leaflet we deliver, every post that we do, we can do it. And it's only by us doing it, and every single one of us voting Labour, that we can bring about the real change that so many of us deserve and aspire to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marsha. I hear that John is on his way, so I'm going to take a short convenience break now to refill your glasses, go to the toilet, and hopefully when you come back, John McDonnell will be here.
Right, can everyone sit down because John's come and he's only got about 3 minutes before he has to run away and do something else. And Richard's gone to the balloon, he'll be back in a minute. Oh, there's Richard. So can everyone, Katie and Anthony and everyone, can you turn round because John's come? Thank you.
I think you'll have to go with the row thing.
There he is.
Is that one working?
I'm terrible with mics turning them on.
But he doesn't want to be by himself.
All right, if people could turn back round to face the front, I'm really very lucky that John has actually managed to find some time between the Today programme and Andrew Marr programme and all the other things we've seen him on this week, single-handedly really fighting the election, which I think is brilliant, but it's great for you to be here, John. We've had some really interesting talks already from Francesca, from Marsha, from Kirsten, myself, and lots more to come. We know you can't stay with us that long, but we would very much like you to give us your perspective on where we are, and particularly the position of disabled people in the current election.
Okay, what's good is having a disabled mic as well. We're integrating effectively. Look, this goes back some time, you'll have discussed it already. Can I just say, one of the brightest things that happened in 2017 in the election was the election of Marsha de Cordova. And I don't know whether you've watched it in Parliament when she speaks, but the Tories target her. They specifically target her because of her own disability, and also I actually think because she's a woman and she's black, and they target her. And they try and humiliate her, they try and barrack her and all the rest. But what I like about the woman, this is what I admire so much really, she just destroys them. Absolutely. She takes them apart on every level, intellectually, in terms of the discussions of policy, but also, I don't know whether you've seen what she does to them morally. She shames them for what they do and the way they treat people. And that's what's happened in recent years. Look, we go back some time now. We've been waiting for this election to happen for quite a while. And to be honest, I think it is about getting our own back, actually. Because it's been 10 years of it. 10 years of it. When we set up, I spoke at the first DPAC conference with Disabled People Against the Cuts when we founded it. And even then, at that stage, there were grievances, there were anxieties about what was happening, and yes, a depth of anger. Well, I think that's grown year by year. And the tragedy of it is, I remember some of the people who were at that original conference never survived austerity. Didn't survive either because of their disability, but tragically some as well, as you know, took their own lives in despair because they saw no light at the end of the tunnel. Because the disabilities that visible and invisible, that people have endured during that period have been exacerbated by, I think, what you can only describe as brutality of this current regime. And we've argued the case time and time again, but to actually have a UN rapporteur come here and describe the systematic abuse of the human rights of disabled people, objectively set out for the world through the UN what was happening in this country. And it was a disgrace, and it's been a bloody disgrace all the way along, as you know. The number of people now, the number of people who have gone through that work capability assessment and then been declared fit for work, who've died before they can even take up the work. Ken Loach, I was at a screening of Ken Loach's recent film we were up north, we were up in Nottingham. And we had a Q&A after the film itself, and we were talking about Daniel Blake as well and what happened. And he described, he said, I remember on one occasion we were picketing, I think there was 40 or 50 of us outside a job centre, unemployed centre in Kilburn. And we were there because Michael Sullivan had actually died. He was one of the early cases I dealt with who actually had been assessed ready for work and then died soon after. And I think died as a result of the pressures that he was put under, not just the condition he suffered. So let's be absolutely clear. When we go into government on Friday, we are getting rid of the work capability what we want now is a system where if any assessments take place, it's about not are you ready for work, but what do you need to ensure you have a full life? What do you need to support yourself and your families especially? And part of that is about social care, and we've put more money into social care and free personal care, a lot for the elderly, but actually also we've put money into the budget so we have social care for everybody. And it is about social care with dignity. It's about ensuring people have the choice of that social care that they need to support them. Because too many people now have, unfortunately, many friends and comrades have been, well, first of all, as a lack of that support, first of all, been trapped inside their own homes, not able to have a full existence, full enjoyable life, not able to do the normal things in life, just going out, going shopping, going to the theatre, meeting friends. Many of them, because of that lack of social care, got trapped within their own homes. And then after being trapped within their own homes, because of the lack of care within the community, then forced into residential care. Residential care actually can be great for some, but that's what's necessary, but actually for most, it isn't. People want to live independent lives. And it means also recognising that that needs to be properly funded as well. What we're doing, it's in terms of the discussions we've been having about where we go forward. And one of the things we go forward isn't just the WCA, it's all the other forms of support that aren't available at the moment. But one of the worst battering rams that this government has used to force people into subjection and actually then into poverty has been the rollout of universal credit. And what we've said very, very clearly, we'll bring immediately a set of emergency measures to support people. And some of the most iniquitous aspects of UC will go immediately. We will scrap the bedroom tax straight away. We'll end the 2-child limit, which is so discriminatory against families as well. But also that 5-week wait we'll get rid of, where people are waiting so long that they're then forced into loans. But we've had this discussion about then what happens. Well, we're saying we scrap the UC, but we want a new system, a real safety net, but one that goes beyond a safety net and actually provides real support. Now, we had the ILF, the Independent Living Fund, which many of us campaigned to preserve. What we want to do is ensure that we have a system which replicates the ILF as it was then, but also that goes further to provide proper support, but as a matter of choice about how you utilise those resources to the best effect. Because the people who know best about what they need are disabled people themselves. And the torturous assessments that people have gone through over the years, and I've sat in on some of these, have been brutal, unfair, And in some instances, you know as well as I do, we're not about assisting people, but to deny them the resources to save money for a government that was then supposedly reducing the deficit, but they weren't reducing the deficit. No. They were simply shifting it onto the shoulders of everybody else within society. So they saved the bankers, but they saved the bankers at everyone else's expense as a result of their actions themselves. There's a whole programme that we're now looking to see how we reform that social security safety net, how we get resources back into society itself to support disabled people and give people that independent life once again. One of the areas that's been hardest hit in terms of local services has been local government itself. In the budgeting that I've done alongside the manifesto, we're restoring the cuts that have taken place since 2010, and we're going further as well in terms of both the resources that local councils will have, but also their independence to raise funds in through their own systems of local taxation. And yes, looking at the prospect of land value tax to give them an independent income separate from central government too. But it does mean too, that, let's be clear about it, some of the people who've been hit hardest in terms of incomes have been local authority workers and public sector workers throughout. So we've put in our first budget a 5% pay rise immediately for public sector workers, so that we start restoring at least some of the cuts immediately that they've faced over the last 10 years. And then within the lifetime of that Labour government, making sure we restore it all and go further, matching all pay settlements with proper funding through local government and the other public services, but also matching any pay settlement that goes in the private sector as well. Let's just come on to it, because the day, I think, is the day, today is the day when we need to address it even more than what's happened in the debate so far. And, you know, sometimes a photograph can be much more effective than any spoken words. And it happened, if you remember, can you remember when a couple of years ago when there's that photograph of the dead child on the beaches, that actually summed up what we're doing to people as they seek to see security and safety. And that dead child epitomised all that was happening in terms of refugees and asylum seekers across the world. Well, I think the photograph on the front page of the Mirror today of a child suffering from pneumonia being treated on the floor of the Leeds General Hospital summed up and epitomised exactly what's happened to our health service over the last 10 years under the Tories. And there'll be more. There'll be more. It seems there's more revelations coming out tonight about the state of the health service right the way across the country, and also more revelations about the treatment of even younger children as a result of the cuts. And some of you may have seen the video tonight. That was, even the BBC, believe it or not, were forced to actually put it up on their website as well, where Boris Johnson gets interviewed about and is asked to look at the picture of the child on the floor, and refuses to look at it to the point he takes this telephone off the journalist. So during the interview, the journalist said, "Can I have my phone back, please? Because all I want you to do is look at the picture." Eventually he does look at the picture and then wanders off about Brexit yet again. I actually think we're in a situation where if we don't win this election on Friday, the health service is gone. And I think it's as a result of cuts and privatisation, and yes, it will be for sale for Trump if they get back in. That's how serious this is. So in these coming days, it is about reminding people of what the Tories have done to our NHS and what they will do if they ever get the chance. I was asked today in interviews about Johnson, and I raised this issue of the child on the floor and Johnson's response. And it's interesting what happened tonight. One of the responses that the Tories did is they did this thing about, a dead cat, where you throw another issue onto the table. And one of the issues they tried to raise, they tried to allege that when Hancock visited the hospital today as part of a publicity stunt, when he came out, it was said one of his aides was hit by a Labour campaigner. But then the film emerged, and the BBC ran that story, by the way, and others did as well. But then within an hour, the video emerged, and no one was hit. The aide walked into another person. And so all of a sudden, a number of the newspapers now are having to reverse the story. And even the BBC and Laura Kearnsberg has had to correct it. And whenever did you think you'd hear that? But it was an attempt, I think, a cheating, lying, typical Tory attempt to move the story onto something different rapidly. But actually it's moved the story back into the fate of the NHS for the future itself. All those issues are there. Let me just say one other thing as well. We're facing a crisis of all our public services. Local council services is what's happening in terms of DWP, it's what happened in terms of the NHS. It's also happening in terms of housing as well. 700 people last year, homeless, died on our streets. 700 of our fellow citizens died out there. And there'll be more as a result of this weather at the moment. Most of those people who died will have had some form of disability, visible or invisible, that they could no longer cope with. And many of them, unfortunately, were not provided with the suitable accommodation to meet their needs, and actually often without the support, often without the mental health support that they needed, and found themselves on the streets. We're the 5th richest country in the world, and we have 700 fellow citizens dying on our streets. What does that say? What does that say about the values of this government? What does that say? You know, we're coming up to Christmas, where people will, Christian or not, will be celebrating Christmas. Christians will be supporting celebrating the birth of Jesus Christ. And what does that say about any form of Christianity in this country with this government? But whatever your belief or no belief, whatever it is, whatever your values, you must rail against that, surely. You must be as angry as some of us that that's allowed to happen in this wealthy country. 700 died. On Friday, when Jeremy Corbyn goes into number 10, we're launching... We're launching the biggest...
Hey.
Conrad, thanks.
Go for it.
We're launching, that's exactly what I'll be doing Friday night.
Me too.
We'll be launching immediately a programme of support for homeless people to get them off the streets. And we've set aside, in the health funding we've set aside significant sums in terms of mental health support, because many of those people out there have had mental health issues, under stress. And it's interesting as well how many of them are ex-service people suffering from post-traumatic disorder as well. We'll do that, but also we'll start the largest house building programme this country has seen to make this and we'll be proud to call those homes that we built council houses again. Let me say this finally, because I'm supposed to be speaking elsewhere. I know, I get that. That's why they call me the late John MacDonald. Let me just say this, and we've had this discussion before in other forums, which is, this movement we've built now in terms of the Labour movement is a movement. We've built over the last 10 years in particular, thanks to Richard and others who are here, just tireless work. We've built a disability movement within this country again. And we've got to the situation now where no one can ignore us anymore. They can't ignore us because we won't let them ignore us. All those demonstrations and occupations and public meetings and discussions where we're in the face of people all the time has worked. They thought 10 years ago, when they made that choice that the bankers wouldn't pay for the crisis but the rest of society would, they thought they could target disabled people and there would be no resistance. What we've demonstrated over this near decade now is the fundamental resistance that we've organised. We've harassed them, we've shamed them, we've forced them to look at what the consequences of their actions are. And on Thursday, I tell you, by our votes, we will make them pay for what they've done. We'll elect a Labour government. I'm confident. The polls, I don't believe them, but they're coming our way. And if you look at what's happening on the ground, every constituency campaign now is like an individual by-election being fought with a massive number of our members now on doorstep after doorstep, knocking on doors, persuasive conversations, delivering the leaflets, making sure our information is ready for the day when we knock on Thursday to get people out to vote. But let's be absolutely clear. This is not going to be like anything in the past. This is not about electing a group of Labour MPs who we expect them to go off and change the world. That will never happen. We'll only succeed, and I say this time and time again, we'll only succeed because we'll all go into government. We'll all go into government. And just as the ideas and the creativity in this movement has developed the policies that have gone into the manifesto that I think is the most popular and radical that a Labour Party has ever produced, just as our creativity and our solidarity has enabled us to get to that stage, then what we've got to do is when we go into government, we all go into government to sustain that government, but also to radicalise it at every stage. This is just the first stage. We need those new ideas, that creativity, that engagement, that mobilisation. And in that way, I just say time and time again, you know, we are going to transform our society. We've argued time and time again, you know. The slogan was, another world is possible. We used it time and time again. It isn't just possible now. It's necessary. But also, on Thursday, it will be in sight for all of us. Now, in some ways, we're living the dream that we've had for generations about a Labour Prime Minister being elected on a socialist programme. And on Friday morning, I'm looking forward to being there when Jeremy turns up on his bike, takes off his bicycle clips and walks into number 10. Because it won't be just Jeremy walking into number 10, it'll be all of us. I've got to shoot. No, I'm sorry for that. I just want to say this. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank everyone for the solidarity that we've shown each other through the most difficult times for disabled people in this country in generations. I want to thank people for the solidarity that when sometimes we've been down, we've lifted each other up. And sometimes in the hardest of circumstances, when it's been the harshest brutality levelled against us, the way in which people have stood firm in the belief that we can win in the end and that we can transform lives and create that new world and that new society. Well, on Thursday, and then as we go into Friday, that's what we're going to do. Solidarity.
We have one more speaker. One has had a puncture after a day of canvassing, so can't get here, Barbara. And Janine, I'm not sure, you're not in here, Janine, are you? No? Okay. So our last speaker is keeping the best for last, apart from some other people, Micheline Mason, who has been part of our movement really from the beginning in the current form. And I'm going to give the floor to Micheline to wind us up, and then just a few comments after. Do you want to speak from there, or do you want to come behind?
I need a table.
Okay.
I need to come.
Right, so Micheline just needs to come back. Pull this? Just pull it out. And she can come up. Do you want to stand?
Sorry for getting my pops.
That's it, rise up.
Rise up.
Biblical rising up of Michelin to address us.
Okay, is this working?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Well, wasn't all that wonderful? Yeah. Wow. I'm just going to say something which is one of those things that I think is what people call a blinding flash of the obvious, but I haven't really heard it said very much. One of the things that's wonderful about the new manifesto for disabled people is that it adopts a social model. And that has been something that disabled people have created and fought for many a year. And it completely changes the view of where the problem lies and what needs to be done. I just want to talk about an aspect of it that I think we haven't talked about enough, which is that oppression creates disabled people. There are far, far more disabled people now because of the austerity measures that have been taken than there were before they started. And I just want to say a little bit about that if you spend 10 years stripping away all the things that people basically need to live, then you are going to make them ill. You are going to make them disabled. You may kill them. The things which I think have been taken away, piece by piece, first of all, what the psychologists call agency, being in control of your own life, having any say over very basic things. Everybody knows that when that goes, when you no longer feel you're in control, anxiety takes its place. You get depressed, you get scared, you get frustrated, you get panicky, all sorts of things happen. Many of these things which we then get labelled for. The other things that are very obvious, food. We have how many thousands of people living in food poverty? Food is nutrition. You know, if you don't eat properly, you get ill. If you don't eat properly, you can't fight off diseases. These are all absolutely basic things. Shelter. If you're not warm and you don't have a roof over your head, and not only a roof over your head, but one that you know will still be over your head tomorrow and next week and in a year's time, then you are insecure. You know, your basic need for shelter, for warmth, has been taken. Air. We talk about air, the air pollution. But, you know, asthma and those diseases which are related to polluted air cause more deaths amongst children than many of our what look like more serious impairments. And it's all completely unnecessary. These things are all things that have been created. The connection with other people, a fundamental need for all human beings, has been eroded by all of these other things, by the lack of control, by the search, you know, by hunger, by cold, by homelessness, you know, by not being able to breathe, by our lack of access to nature, which is known to keep us well and to help us recover from trauma and from illnesses. When you take all those things away from people, when you decide to roll back the state and create a society in which those basic needs are no longer being met in greater and greater numbers. We've always had some below the bar. You know, we've never had a society where nobody's suffering and there is no illness and no poverty or homelessness. but the level has risen enormously. And with it has gone all the insecurity, with it has come all these mental health issues. Young people in school, the girls harming themselves, the boys harming each other, you know. Talk about more services are needed, a counsellor in every school. Well, is that really the issue? Of course, once the damage is done, people need help to recover. But the real issue is that we created that damage. We did the harm. And all you have to do, actually, is not provide endless services. You have to meet these basic needs. You have to feed people. You have to put a roof over their head. You have to give them something meaningful to do and connection with other human beings. And then miraculously, they'll get better. You know? It's just, I think it's a very, very important thing to keep in mind when we fight for what we're fighting for. I mean, people tonight have spoken about those of us who have permanent impairments, who need a little bit of extra resource on top of all those basic things in order to live fulfilled lives, including, for example, you know, specialised technology like me, and personal assistance and a few other things. But those those of us who have impairments of that sort are a very small number compared to the numbers that are being created by these inhumane systems here and around the world. I mean, this is an issue. We all know war probably creates more disabled people than anything else. It's an issue about oppression wherever it's happening. Its focus here, in such a rich and wealthy country, as people keep saying, is that we've chosen, the government have chosen to prioritise where they spend the masses of resources we create. They don't create it. People create it. They just decide where it gets spent. And I've thought a lot about many people that seem to be very confused about where's all the money going to come from to pay for all these marvellous things, you know, when obviously we've got to, you know, stay within our budget and so on. And they often talk about, well, I run my budget at home. If I can't afford a new television, I don't buy a new television. You know, you've got to live within your means, and so on. But then I thought about it, and I thought, well, okay, even though there's a lot to be argued with in that sort of picture of world economics, let's look at it like a family. My family, is very typical, I'm quite sure, of 90%, 99% of people, working class families in this country, and middle class families, in fact, all of them, in fact. When you are thinking about how you spend your household budget, you prioritise the needs of the most needy people, don't you? Yes. Don't you provide for your baby's milk first, before you start thinking about another set of golf clubs that they're going to buy at the top? Don't you go without food so your children will have a good meal? Don't you, put time aside to go and visit your elderly mum, and in our case, bring her home to live with you when she could no longer manage at all? You know, people do that because we're decent people. Because we actually are a very kind and caring society. We do it all the time. So why do we accept that a government can make the opposite priorities? That it can choose to spend our money on the golf clubs and the racehorses and the rich, wealthy, you know, bank accounts of people. Whilst the people who are creating that wealth are starving. How can we do that? And I thought about why is it that this movement John was talking about, this, you know, why did Jeremy Corbyn get elected to become leader of the party against everything people tell us we want? You know, and why have we become the biggest political party? I think certainly the biggest political socialist party in the whole of Europe. You know, why is that? Why are thousands of people out on the streets? All those young people in Momentum and all the rest of it. Why are we doing that? And it's because basically it isn't about idolising John, although he is gorgeous, or Jeremy, who is also gorgeous. But it's because they reflect something about the fact that we're gorgeous. That, you know, we want a world that is befitting what we believe in, and our kindness and our goodness. And they are offering us something which reflects that. So I'm going to finish with this poem that I've written, which I think tries to say some of these things. It took me a long time to write it. I called it A Labour of Love. The hard left have the softest hearts, but love is a four-letter word in politics. Love is not the pink stuffed hearts of romantic fiction, nor the obsessive desire for a lover for life. Love is not a doe-eyed puppy licking our faces, or the silencing of our anger in the face of injustice. Love is the nighttime rocking of a crying baby, the cooked meals taken to a neighbour in need, volunteers saving lives in raging seas, on craggy mountains and deep dark caves, risking their own. The saving of endangered species by deliberate planning, the listening ear when a heart needs to break, the 1,000 daily kindnesses which make a communal life work. Love is the fierce core of our being, resonating like a tuning fork. When suffering crashes into our awareness, regardless of the names of the victims, whether known to us in close proximity or torn and bleeding in some foreign land, in compassion and empathy, love fuels our actions in their defence. Love is the best part of us, the winner of the struggle to be just. A politician who walks the streets after a disaster, holding the bereaved, listening to their pain, inflates our crushed hearts with hope. It is not one man we love, but love itself, our love, a reflection of our humanity, a desire for a better world, to be bellowed out with pride. Labour is our work, a labour of love.
Thank you, Miss. And we have one more person to round us up, poet. Introduce yourself.
Okay, my name's Brian. I work as a mental health support worker within the NHS, but I'm also a poet. The reason I was invited here was I sort of got together with four like-minded people, a singer, a musician, a filmmaker and a lyricist, and we made a video that which was my spoken word with a young lady singing on it and some music behind it, and we made a video for it, and we thought it'd be a rallying call for the Red Army for this election. It went a bit mad on Twitter. I released it and I went to sleep and it was like 30,000 views. I was like, what? And then General Secretary of the Labour Party, Jenny Formby, tweeted it, and then Rob Delaney, the actor, tweeted it, and then Laura Pidcock tweeted it, then Dawn Butler tweeted it. John McDonnell liked it, but he never tweeted it. I don't know.
It stayed.
This is the spoken word part of it. It's called We Are Many. I see the streets I walk down that almost look the same, until I scratch the surface and I see the pain. I see that children of friends into poverty are born and 0-hour contracts have now become the norm. I see the disparity in wealth is now bigger than ever before. Food banks, food vouchers, bailiffs at the door. I see them redeveloping our communities by taking away our homes and breaking down our neighbourhoods to the bare bones. I see a hostile environment for the Windrush generation. Yet my father was one of those invited here to rebuild this nation. I see our beloved NHS, an institution close to our hearts, bled dry by PFI and being privatised in parts. I see homeless people sleeping in the doorways of this town. Yet countless properties are empty, boarded up or shut down. I see mental health and well-being wearing ever thin, as social care cuts mean people struggle with the demons within. I see friends judged fit for work even though they are sick and then taking their lives because they can't take no more of it. I see a government that could not be any worse, where our lives come second and profits come first. I see that those in power can no longer ignore the voices of the disenfranchised who are screaming, no more. We must all repeat the mantra and hold it to be true, that we are many and they are few. Thank you.
Thank you. Brilliant way to end. And this is a rally, not a public meeting with questions, so we're going to end it there. I hope you've got food for thought, but most importantly, you've got to talk to 5 disabled people and 20 other people before Thursday. And we would like some money. We paid for this, myself and Susie have paid for all of this, which is fine, we're that committed, but it would be nice to have a bit back because it's quite a lot of money. We want to give people a good time. I hope you've had a good time. I hope there's plenty of food for thought. We've got all your emails. If you haven't given it to us, give it to us on the way out, because this is just the beginning of a network in London to fight back for disabled people's rights. So thank you very much for coming. Right.